Hello everyone and welcome to the final part of this tutorial series. In this one we'll be doing an overview of what we've learned so far, and we'll be doing it without React. So like we all know, Redux is a state management library for managing the state of your application, and it uses the concept of stores. So you just have one single store where all your data is being stored in your application, and whenever the store updates, every other part of your application that is connected to the store updates accordingly. So in this project, this is just a simple project bootstrapped with an npm project. So we have the app.js here, and the first thing I'll do would be, so I'm just trying to show you guys doing stuff without React. So I'm gonna require Redux. And the reason I'm using this require is because we are not using ES6 imports. When we created our app with Create React App, it's configured all those stuff for us. So we'll be using the default one over here. So the first thing we have to do is to create a store, or let me just put the steps accordingly. So the first thing is we have a store. We also have the reducer. Then we have the actions, and we have something like connect. So these are the steps to make your Redux application work. So the first thing we're doing is to import this create store function, which is responsible for creating your store. So we create a basic store over here. So I'll do store equals to create store, and the store needs a reducer, but we have to create the reducer, which we haven't done. And if you can remember what I talked about, what we learned about reducers. So reducers are functions that updates our store. So the actions can't update the store. Nothing can update the store except your reducers. So I'm going to create a very simple reducer here. And besides, this application is going to be a quotes app. So I'm going to create a very simple store. So we have our states, because the reducer accepts two arguments, the state and the action. So we have to create the initial state, and I could do that quickly. So the initial state is going to be an array, because this is going to be a list of quotes. So we'll talk about the author of the quotes. I can okay, so I'll copy this guy over here, and the quote itself should be this. So we have the author and we have the quotes. Okay, I could add this for now. So we have the initial states, which we've passed over here, and inside our reducer, what we do? The reducer returns the updated state. But remember from what we've learned, we can actually handle different actions inside here. But before I do that, I could just return the states by default. So it's going to be returning this initial state, because we've set the states to the initial states. So now we have our reducer and we have the store. We can simply do a simple console statement to see what the store looks like. The reason I'm also doing this is to show you that Redux can exist without React. So you can use it for your Vue application. You can use it for your vanilla JavaScript applications too. So when I do a console.log of the store, so I could come over here, and I installed nodemon, so I could do nodemon app.js instead of just doing node app.js. So you can see we have our store, and the store is made up of 4 functions. Yeah, 4 functions over here. So we've know how dispatch works, we've made use of get states. In this tutorial, I'll also be showing you how to make use of this subscribe, and we'll also talk about replace reducer. Although replace reducer is an advanced topic, but I'll just talk about it a bit. So we have these 4 functions here. So to get the current state, what do? We could just simply call get states, and you can see the default states. So we have this array with 1 object. So cool. So the next thing we'd want to do would be dispatching actions. So to dispatch an action, remember what I told you guys, we can create the action, because the action by default is just a JavaScript object. But we also learned about action creators that gives you a kind of like a simpler way to actually return actions. So I'm going to return an object which is an action of type add quotes, and it's going to have a payload. And remember what I told you about payload, just additional data. So the payload is going to have the author and the quotes. So I'd have to pass, that means this action creator would need 2 parameters. The first one being the author and the second one being the quotes. So I'd also pass it down to the payload. So now that we have this action, we can actually do something like this. Store.dispatch. So what do we want to dispatch? An action. We want to dispatch the add quotes action creator, and it needs 2 arguments. The first one being the author. So I'll head over here and grab one other quote. Okay. Which one? What did I grab the last time? Okay. So I'll grab this one by John Lennon. I'll just copy this. So that is gonna be John Lennon, and the quote is gonna be this. Cool. So we dispatched the action. Then we could just do a simple console.log of the state to just see what the state looks like. So author payload. Okay, so I'm supposed to pass in the quotes as the second property of the object. So I'll pass in quotes. Cool. So initially, okay. Am I doing something wrong? Okay, I guess I'm doing something wrong. So in my add quotes, I'm returning this particular action. Okay, I'm not doing something wrong. So now we've dispatched the action. And remember what I told you guys from previous videos. The action can't update the store. It is only the reducer that can update the store. So we have this add quote action, but we've not handled it inside our reducer. So to do that, we could do a simple if statement. So I could do if, I could do a switch statement, whichever one you want. I'll just choose to do a switch statement. And what do we want to check? We want to check the action.type, because every action should have a type property. So we're getting the action from here. So the value we want to check against is what this particular action called add quotes. So we have it. We won't be using the break statement because we can use the return to break out from the function. So what do we want to return? We want to return the previous states with the additional data. So to do that, remember what I told you guys about reducers. You don't update your states mutably. So we can just simply use the spread operator to copy out the previous states and append our new state to it. So we are updating the state mutably. So I'll do action dot payload. So that is this action dot this payload, and it's going to return this object. So it's going to add this new object into our state. So by default, what should we do? By default, we should return the state. This shouldn't be new to you if you followed the previous tutorial. So if I save this, cool. So initially we had only one data in the array, but now I mean over here. Initially we had only one data in the array, but now we have the array with two objects. So the quote by Walt Disney and the second quote by John Lennon. So cool, we are making progress. So now we've covered 3 steps. We've have the reducer, we have the store, and we have the actions where we dispatch the actions. The last thing we'll be doing, if you followed the previous videos, in our React application, we made use of the connect functions to listen for changes in our store. So whenever our store is being updated, our React component listens for that changes and updates the component accordingly. But since we are not using React and we don't have access to the connect function, by default, this is what Redux supplies, subscription. So what that connect function actually does is that it subscribes to the store. Remember what I told you about React Redux? It's just a helper library to connect your Redux application, to connect your React application to Redux in a more easy way instead of going through the low-level API. So behind the scenes, what connect function does is that it subscribes to your store and sends the updates to your components accordingly. But since we are not using React, I'll be showing you how to do subscription manually. So one thing to note, I'll copy this subscription immediately after I create the store, and I'll tell you why later on. So over here, if you notice something, in order to see the value of our store, we are doing console.log manually. So immediately we created the store, we did a console.log. Then after we dispatched an action, we did another console.log statement to get the state. But when you create a subscription to your store, you don't have to manually do this. So whenever your store is being updated, you can trigger an action that will actually happen. So let me show you what that means. Okay. Why am I having multiple? Let me just quit this and do something. Okay, it's working as expected. I don't know why NodeMon. So let me just. So now to create a subscription, and if you notice, the things I'm trying to cover are the initial stuff. So we've talked about dispatch, we've talked about get state. So let's talk about subscribe. So now to make use of that, I'll do something like this. Store.subscribe, and it takes in a listener that executes when there is any change in when your Redux store is updated. So over here, the simple thing I would do, since you are not implementing React Redux or creating the connect function from scratch, is that I would print out the state whenever the store is updated. So I could comment out this, and I could comment out this over here. So that is what this subscribe function does. It takes in a listener, so whenever the store is being updated, the callback function inside executes. So you can see we still have our console, we still have access to see our states without manually calling the get state. So now you might be saying, okay, this does not really make sense. Or how do we know? Because it just prints out everything once. So how do we know that this subscription function is actually executing? So one simple way I could do this would be to do something like this. I could create, I could use set timeout to execute, to dispatch an action after a certain amount of time. So I could dispatch an action after 3 seconds. And what do I want to do here? I want to dispatch some other action. So I could just take a very simple quote. That's going to be dispatched after 3 seconds. So code by Anna Frank. So you'd be able to see how this subscribe function works. So I'll save. This is our initial store. Then after 3 seconds, can you see Anna Frank is being added to the store? And you can see the reason why we are saying here is because of this function over here got executed. So that's this is the basic building block of Redux as a library. So the final thing I'm going to be talking about is this guy over here, replace reducer. Although this is a advanced topic which I will not be covering, but what this simply does is that the place you could use this replace reducer function is if you want to lazy load your Redux reducers, or if you're using lazy loading in your Redux React Redux application. So for instance, there are some applications you might be building whereby you want some certain parts of your code, some certain parts in your application not to be loaded at the initial stage. So for example, from the app we created in the previous videos where we had the channel and the authentication part. So by default, you might not want to load the code for the authentication part because not all users are going to actually log into your application. So with lazy loading, you can, or code splitting, you can actually split out the authentication part of that application. So when you split out the authentication parts, you might also want to split out the Redux part, which will contain your reducers, your actions, and stuffs like that. So by default, you might just want to load some part of your reducers or some part of your Redux code. So with replace reducers, you can actually use it in combination with combine reducers. So for your combine reducers, you might want to have the channel state. You might want to have only the channel state by default. Then whenever the user logs in, you can now call your combine reducers and add the authentication part. Like I said, that is an advanced topic, but this is just where you can use replace reducers. If you want to add more reducers to your state, you don't want to just load all your whole reducers at the start of your application. So I also made mention of why I added this subscription immediately after we created the store. So we added it immediately after we created the store so that whenever you dispatch an action later on, this stuff is going to be executed. If you copied this subscribe function and added it somewhere else, it might not catch all the whole action. So to show you what that means, I could just come to subscribe, and you can see over here the listener, which is the guy inside the function, the callback inside. He said the listener should not expect to see all state changes as the states might have been updated multiple times during a nested dispatch, blah, blah, blah. But you can see over here, it is however guaranteed that all subscribers registered before the dispatch started will be called with the latest state. So you can see the subscriber over here. I registered it before I started dispatching any action. So that is Redux in a nutshell. Every other thing you encounter would just be based on the type of application you're working on. And I hope this series was helpful to you, and I hope you have a better understanding of Redux. Thank you for watching. Bye.